بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعليه وصحبه أجمعين ثم ما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. We're just resuming the seerah, the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But before we carry on and just continue from where we were last time, and we continue on in the sessions, we're just going to do like a summary, like the seerah, the story so far. What have we covered so far, like quite briefly? In the seerah, the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is going to be a good refresher. And once we do this, then inshallah, next session we can move on. So this is a good reminder of briefly of what we've covered since we started talking about the seerah, the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if we recall, and when we go through this, I think a lot of this is probably going to be familiar to you, but it's good to just see this again. So, firstly, introduction. The first thing we said, introduction. What is Seerah? Why study the Seerah? So, if you remember, we said the Seerah is very detailed, the life of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And it's not only about him, it's about everything that was happening at the time around him. So, all the other people around him, they all contribute to the Seerah and all the happenings that happened day to day. And then we talked about why should you study it? Like, what's the point? What's the point about studying the Seerah? The life of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he's our role model. If we get to know him, we love him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he instructs us to and we can learn some amazing lessons. So that's why it's very, very important to go through the seerah, the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why study the seerah? And then we talked about pre-Islamic society. What is, like we talked a bit about the history, the geography, about the politics, and about the Arabs at the time, where they were living, the bordering Arabs, the main Arabs, some history about the location, some politics about what used to happen. The fact that there was no government there at the time, there was different tribes, and we talked about economics. What did they used to do in terms of their business? And we talked about they used to make business trips as well, specifically in Makkah. The social, moral, what were some of the social and the moral things that used to go on, like in the society around at that time? What did they used to do? The fact that there's lawlessness in the society and a lot of wrong used to happen as well. And we talked about some of the positives of the Arabs as well. If you remember, like they were very hospitable people. They were very connected to their family, and they were had strong. There were people that were true to their word as well. So there were some positives as well. And the unique talents. What were some of the unique talents of the Arabs? We talked about this. And then pre-Islamic society, part two, we talked about the religion of the Arabs. So again, the religion, this is what was the religion at the time? The superstitions, what they believed in, the fact that they used to do a lot of gambling, fortune telling as well. We mentioned this. There was a lot of corruption in society. So pre-Islamic society, part one, part two. So we've got a good understanding, a good idea of the landscape, the geography, the history, the politics at the time of the Arabs, the religion, what superstitions they followed, the fact that they used to gamble a lot. The fact that generally it was a corrupt society at this time, before the advent of Islam. And then we talked about monotheism before Islam. These were the people, the Hunafa, who used to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, if you recall. And there were a select few people, and we did mention like Waraka bin Nawfal, and these people used to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And there's a list of about 10 people. And there was even some understanding that, for example, Abdul Muttalib, he was one of them as well. And we talked about this. So there were some people who did hold on to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, but that had been lost over the years. You can imagine from the time of Isa alayhi salam, and then there's a big gap before the coming of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, in that time of like many hundred years, obviously there is corruption in religion, but there's some people who did used to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone, and some they were like, some true Christians, true to holding on to the original teachings of Isa alayhi salam as well at that time. Okay. Then the history of Zamzam. And we talked about first the sealing of the well of Zamzam. Like, how was Zamzam sealed? How was the water sealed? There was like a tribal conflict, and some treasures were hidden in the well, and the well was sealed. You may remember that. And then what happened after a while? Then how was Zamzam? How was it dug up again? The fact that Abdul Muttalib had some dreams, if you remember, and he had some dreams, and he went to that place and he dug, and he started digging, and the Zamzam was unearthed again. And this is a very significant event because we talked about why was this so significant? Because it signified something amazing will happen soon. At some point, the coming of the final messenger, Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, just like Zamzam has been unearthed after a long time, then the religion of Islam is going to be established after a long time. So, and the Zamzam, it was obviously originally it was a miracle. It came from a point under the ground, and then it was sealed. It just didn't come over ground again. But obviously, it's a miracle. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed it to spring up again, but they had to dig up at a certain place. And when they dug, they actually found the water quite, the exact point, and then the water gushed again. So it's just something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed to happen. And after the history of Zamzam, we talked about the invasion of the elephants, that historic event, the invasion of the elephants. And this was when we talked about Abraha first, and how, some of the political situations, how the Christians had reclaimed Yemen from the Jewish people at the time. Abraha, how he built a church, how he wanted he was motivated by money, how he wanted the economic capital, you could say, like at that time, which was Mecca, he wanted that to come to Yemen, and how he built a church to try and attract people, how that got defaced by an Arab person who went there, and how this led to Abraha to gather together an army and journey to Mecca, and his intention was to go there and destroy the Kaaba, which we talked about what happened, some events which happened on the way, and some of the tribes that he talked to, and some of the things which happened. And eventually, when he got there, we know that the birds destroyed the army. And Abraha, and we talked about this famous conversation between Abraha, Abdul Muttalib, and they were not able to harm at all the Kaaba. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he protected the Kaaba, and the birds destroyed the army. And the Braha's fate, the army, basically, they most of them died, and the Braha was injured. And when he went back to Yemen, he basically died when he got there, and he was in a terrible state with limbs falling off, and all these sort of things. This was a sign. And what was significant of this time? The Prophet ﷺ was born in this year, Am al-Fil. That's why this year is referred to also. That's how it's remembered. The birth of the Prophet ﷺ was in this year, when the invasion of the elephants happened. And then we talked a bit about the family of the Prophet ﷺ. The family, Hashim, his great grandfather, who's rich, he was the one that started the Rihlat al-Shita'i was safe. The business in Mecca, where they used to go in the summer, they used to go north and to Syria, and in the winter they used to go south to Yemen to do business, and they used to get goods from Mecca, go there, sell the goods, get some more goods, bring them back to Mecca and sell them. This business was started by Hashim, the great grandfather of Prophet ﷺ, and he was, like we said, he's very rich. He had a son, Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib was born in Medina, in Yathrib at the time, and we talked about this as well. And he came over to Mecca, and there was some conflict at that time as well. He asked some relatives to help him in Medina to support him, and he went back and he became the leader of the tribe of the Quraysh, of Banu Hashim. So Abdul Muttalib, he then was the grandfather, Prophet ﷺ became the leader, and then Abdullah, the father of the Prophet ﷺ, we talked about him as well. He was the son of Abdul Muttalib, and he was, a son. He really loved him. He was like the prince of Makkah, Abdullah, and he was, he had some amazing qualities and characteristics. And he talked about, even at this stage, the mother of the Prophet ﷺ, Amina, how Abdullah married Amina, and they were like, the two celebrities of the time in Makkah, like we said, like the most good-looking, the beautiful couple, excellent character, and they're the parents of the Prophet ﷺ, and this is the fate of his parents. Like, what ended up happening? We said it's not for us to discuss, whether in the end, in the Akhirah, what is their fate? But this is what we talked about as well. Then we talked about the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, and like we said, this was at the time, the invasion of the elephants in that year, Am al-Fil. The birth date we mentioned of the Prophet ﷺ as well. We mentioned what were the experiences of his mother, Amina, during her pregnancy. It's very miraculous. Like, she didn't feel any weight of the child. It was so light, and a lot of amazing experiences happened. And she talks about this. And the name Muhammad was given by Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ. And the name Muhammad and Ahmad, if you may remember, they're both the meaning, the two names of the Prophet ﷺ. Ahmad is to praise the one who's praised. Muhammad is the one who's continually praised. So even his name signifies the status that the Prophet ﷺ was going to have later on in his life. What were some of the global events? The global events which happened. The fire of Faris. This was extinguished after many, many years. Kisra, the Persian emperor, his palace, like it shook. The balcony shook at this time when the Prophet ﷺ was born. The river Tigris, the levels dropped. And there were prophecies before the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. At this time, there's many Christians and Jews around the world. There was just like, a lot of talk that something is happening. The light which came out, the light which radiated all the way to Asham. And some amazing things like the stars came down at the time of the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. So there's a lot of signs around the world, global signs that something amazing is happening. This amazing person, Prophet ﷺ, is being born. And then we talked about the women who cared for the Prophet ﷺ. The women who cared, and what was the significance? And these were the women. And by the way, talking about the father, Abdullah, the father of the Prophet ﷺ, he died. We know this. He died before the Prophet ﷺ was born. And we do talk about this, how this really affected Amina as well. How she used to write poetry. The fact that my husband, he died, and she's very sad. So he passed away in Yathrib as well, in a business trip, as happened with Hashim. So we talked about this. And then the women who cared for the Prophet ﷺ, Baraka, Ummu Ayman, and Thuwayba. And if you remember, Baraka, she was, and both of these women were African women. And that's something very, very important. Baraka, that she's had a very close relationship with the family of the Prophet ﷺ, right? And even later on in his life. And she even married Zayd. Zayd, who was the adopted son of the Prophet ﷺ, Baraka and Zayd were married. And this is something, and the Prophet ﷺ really loved Zayd. And Thuwayba was another milk mother of the Prophet ﷺ. She was freed by Abu Lahab. And the Prophet ﷺ, he really had a close relationship with her. And there was an interesting thing we mentioned, that Abu Lahab, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, who's going to be punished, like Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab. He was a disbeliever. But there was a narration that every Monday he gets some relief from the punishment of the grave. And why does he get relief every Monday? Because that was the day that he freed Thuwayba. So he freed her, like right at the beginning, as a slave. So that one thing he did, like that one good thing he did, that means he does not get punished on that day, like subhanAllah, like according to that narration. But this is how much those who, because Thuwayba is linked to the Prophet ﷺ, and how much value that's given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And like we said, these are African women. So you have to have respect for people of other colors, other races. And this is very important. And we talked about who is the most famous woman who cared for the Prophet ﷺ. Halima, right? This was Halima, the wet nurse, and Halima's story. And this was like a whole section dedicated to the fact that this is like an amazing story where at that time, when she came, Halima, she was like a wet nurse. Their job was to come to Mecca. She came at that time. And, there's only one child left. Like, he was an orphan. Nobody wanted to take the Prophet ﷺ, to take him back. Eventually, she took him. Some amazing blessings happened on the journey. And even when she went back home, like there's a drought at the time. But somehow, her farm gave lots of vegetation and crops. And people are thinking, how did this happen? So lots of blessings from looking after the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ growing up as a 2-year-old as well. And we talked about the fact that he had, as a 2-year-old, he was a very special child. And then when he was 2 years old, he had to, as was the practice, he was taken back to Mecca to visit his mother. And his mother wanted to keep him, but there was a disease at that time in Mecca. So Halima convinced Amina, no, let me take him back. Let me take him back. So she convinced her. So Halima took the Prophet ﷺ back as a 2-year-old, back with her to her farm. And then we talked about the famous incident, the splitting of the chest of the Prophet ﷺ. This incident, when the Prophet ﷺ, this was when he was back, he was living with Halima. He was around 4 years old, 4.5 years old at this time. And the splitting of the chest, physical, it's like an operation. Like he was blue in the face at that time from the descriptions. Like the angels that came, they split him open, took out the heart of the Prophet ﷺ, washed it with Zamzam in the gold, silver utensils. We talked about this in detail. And this event, it scared obviously the living daylights out of Halima and her family, right? Because this, like, what's going on? So age 4.5, the Prophet ﷺ, as a young boy, Halima straight away, like she returned him to Amina. And if you remember, she tried to hide it as well. Like she didn't tell Amina the reason, but Amina, she was clever. She figured out something had gone on. And then she eventually Halima told her the reason why, and Amina mentioned some blessings, some amazing blessings that she experienced, that this child is special. Prophet ﷺ is special, so don't worry, no harm can come to him. This wasn't a bad thing. This is something, this wasn't like some jinn or something that came, or, don't worry. This is all the Prophet ﷺ, my son is being protected. Splitting of his chest. And then we talked about this incident, big incident in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, the death of the mother of the Prophet ﷺ, Amina. Because Amina, she visits Yathrib because she wanted to visit some relatives and the grave of her husband. And she took the Prophet ﷺ with her. And who else was on the journey? Baraka, Ayman, right? And she went there, she spent some time there. And on the way back from Yathrib, this is when the Prophet ﷺ was 6 years old. 6 years old, and his mother died. And it was only Ayman. Baraka was the only one there at the time, and she buried Amina. And the Prophet ﷺ was 6, and we talked about some memories he had of his mother, like growing up, and the fact that he visited her grave much later on with the Sahaba, and he cried, and some we talked about this, like something that really affected him, just as a 6-year-old. Like you can imagine, he's the orphan, like he doesn't have his father died before he was born. Now his mother passes away as a 6-year-old. So who's going to take care of the Prophet ﷺ at this time? The grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ, Abdul Muttalib, he then took care of the Prophet ﷺ, and he was a very loving grandfather. He really loved his grandson, and how he had a special place. If you remember, he had a special seat next to the Kaaba where no one could sit on that seat except the young Muhammad ﷺ. That was reserved for the Prophet ﷺ. He really looked after his grandson. And then another sad event happened. When the Prophet ﷺ was aged 8, Abdul Muttalib died. So his granddad died, someone who's very, very close to. So again, another sadness in the life of this young child. And Abu Talib and Abdul Muttalib, he actually, before this, he designated that Abu Talib would look after the Prophet ﷺ. And Abu Talib, he wasn't very wealthy person, but he was someone who's simple. He really loved the Prophet ﷺ, and he talked about how, some things used to happen, like on his table. Sometimes his kids used to fight over food. The Prophet ﷺ was very good mannered. Like he didn't used to get involved in any of that. And how the whole family, it was blessed. It was a blessing as well, because when they waited and they sat and they ate with the Prophet ﷺ, they would have more barakah. And also we talked about, like, sometimes the Prophet ﷺ used to wake up. And like when you wake up, your hair's messy, you have bits in your eyes, you have to rub your eyes, you have these crusty things. All the other children of Abu Talib used to wake up in like a state, like we all do. But the Prophet ﷺ, when he used to wake up, he didn't have any like bits or anything. He was like really fresh. Again, a miracle. But this is Abu Talib showing, and his family showed real love to the Prophet ﷺ. From the age of 8 onwards, now he's looked after by Abu Talib. Then we talked about Buhaira the monk. The Prophet ﷺ, age 12, where he really wanted to go with Abu Talib. And if you remember, like he was crying, I want to go with you. Abu Talib took him on a business trip to Asham at the age of 12, and they meet Buhaira on the way. This monk, like on the way there, this at the point where they stop off at the service station, basically you can call it. And Buhaira, he realizes something special about this child. He prepares a big feast, and he notices, and he spends some time with this young boy, and he gives some advice to Abu Talib as well, because he knows that this young boy, something special about him. He was a scholar. Buhaira was a scholar, Christian scholar, and he could see from the books, he knew that this is going to be the prophet of the last times, which is coming soon. Age 12, this is what happened. And Abu Talib took the advice of Buhaira at that time. Don't take him further to Sham. It's dangerous. Take him back. And he took him back. Then we talked about the teenage years. Age 13 onwards, you could say. This is the Prophet ﷺ. Some of the experiences, growing up, there was no school at the time. There was no school at that time. The Prophet ﷺ used to, he was just growing up as you could say a normal youth at that time, playing together, these sort of things. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he protected the Prophet ﷺ. So we talked about some things where, like he's carrying rocks with the children, and there were some incidents where his clothes, like his body was protected from being shown, because like some clothes nearly came off, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he protected the Prophet ﷺ, like he caused him to be protected from these things, from what was happening around him. So he used to engage and be in the same society as the other youth, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still protected him. And then he wanted to get a job, and what job did he get? Like he wanted to, and we talked about this, but because he's from an amazing family of the Quraysh, you can't just do any job. The Banu Hashim, you have to do either a business, Obviously, Abu Talib did not let him do a business at that time because of what he experienced, like traveling. What Buhera had said, he became a shepherd. And what did he learn? Like he learned on, amazing things like patience, character, how to manage. Sheep is like managing human beings in a way as well. Like you have to be patient and some leadership skills and some great lessons he learned being a shepherd. And every prophet, we said, every prophet was a shepherd. And this is just a part of the training of the Prophet ﷺ given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then even incidents like the party. Like, do you remember like the party with the Prophet ﷺ? He he wanted to. So, like this is a normal thing. Like young people, you sometimes have a desire, curious about something. And the Prophet ﷺ was no different. He was curious, isn't it? Like the party was going on. There's like some, I want to know what's going on. He was being peer pressure, like people telling him to go and have a look. And the fact that we talked about the fact that he'd go there, he would hear music and like singing and dancing, and twice it happened, like he would pass out. The next day, like there's pressure on him to go again, and he passed out. And the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he protected him, but what we're saying is he wasn't like he knew what went on in society. He wasn't like shelled like in a cocoon, like maybe in like Superman, and like he didn't know what's going on. He suddenly came out of his bubble, became a messenger. He used to live in the society and he used to be, with the same groups of people. And but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he did protect him as well. So this is something that we learn. And then we talked about the sacrilegious war, the Harbul Fijar. And this is something which happened. And the Prophet ﷺ was between the ages of 15 and 20. This is over. There was like a business dispute between members of two tribes, Hawazin and the Quraysh. And one of them, Barad, he killed the guy from Hawazin. He ended up murdering him. And this led to a war because the Quraysh, they would not obviously accept that at the time, we'll give you blood money, because there was like a tribal mentality. So there's one killing. This happened at the age of 15 when the Prophet ﷺ, this incident happened. For 5 years, this war continued. And we talked about the fact that there's only 5 days of fighting in the 5 years. But this experience, and this is inappropriate because obviously it started from a killing and there's no justice and it just got escalated. And the thing is, this is the main education. Just imagine, like, you go to school, right? You do GCSEs at the age of 15, 16, then you do A levels, you do college, you may do some kind of internship, apprenticeship. That's your 15 to 20 years done, right? The Prophet ﷺ, 50 to 20 years, was this experience of this unjust war, because this is what would be the most important education for him. The fact that he would see injustice, the fact that this had an impact on him. He would see society, see what goes on, the propaganda, all these things would prepare him in his role when he would become a prophet. And then we mentioned the Prophet ﷺ, he was forced to fight towards the end of the 5 days, and he didn't want to, but what did he do in the battlefield? He used to do at-tanabbul, like, he used to pick up the arrows which the Hawazin used to fire. He used to pick up the arrows and give them to his people. He tried to do as minimum as he could, basically, but he was forced to get involved. But the main thing is, he saw the evils. He saw the evils of war, and he did not want to. He didn't like war after this. Like, we mentioned this. He did not like injustice, and this is something that really had an impact on him. And just a couple more points. The virtuous pact of social justice, this was on the back of that, and we talked about this as well. How did this happen? The Zubaydi man, if you remember, he came to Mecca, he did some business with Al-As. Al-As lied to him. He didn't pay him for his goods. And then eventually, Al-As, he just couldn't take it anymore. And he went to the Kaaba, he announced that, this guy's taken my goods, he didn't pay me. And the people at that time, they actually, in Mecca, they listened, and the Hilful Fudul was called. And they actually went back and they gave the Zubaydi man his goods back. They went to Alas and they basically demanded, we form this pack of Hilful Fudul. We're going to stand for justice from now on. And the Prophet ﷺ was a witness to this pact. And this happened at the age of 20. And the Prophet ﷺ was 20. So again, you can see that we're going through in this brief summary just what the ages of the Prophet ﷺ at each time. You can just get an idea of this. And the Hilful Fudul was called by the Sahaba as well at the end. Later on, by Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, and we also talked about this when there was injustice done to him. So this was the turning point in Makkah. The pack of social justice, the Hilful Fudul, the virtuous pact was made because they didn't have like a mentality of being just, but they got together and they had enough of, for example, the Harbul Fajar, the sacrilegious war as well. So they made this pact to stand together in justice against anybody. Okay, and then finally, last couple of points. Prophet ﷺ, we talked about as a businessman and a marriage proposal. So early 20s, now he's growing up. he has the same mentality and desires, like as everybody else. He wants to settle down, get married. He wants to start have a stable business. He wants to do some work. And what did he end up doing? Like again, because we said he couldn't go on a business trip as yet, because his uncle Abu Talib did not allow him to still. And what job could he do? He did a local business and he worked on commission, hooking up the retailer with the wholesaler. We talked about this. He did a local business. He had a business partner as well, and we talked about how he really praised his business partner. But the point was, at this stage, he was such an amazing businessman that Khadija, radiallahu anha, she noticed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she noticed him. She hired him, and then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he went on a business trip for Khadija with Maysara, the slave of Khadija, and Khadija was interested. She was keeping an eye out, and when they come back, she was amazed. I'm so happy that all the amazing profit the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made and also his amazing character. She asked her slave, Maysara, her bodyguard, tell me about him. And he told Khadija positive things about the Prophet ﷺ. So this was obviously Khadija. She was a widow. She was becoming interested. A lot of people approached her for marriage. But here, after she fully saw the Prophet ﷺ, like the way he does his business, that's how to judge character of a person. We said this before, how a man does business, how they are with their money. That's how you can judge the character. It's very, very important for marriage as well. And Khadija became interested. And then, after this, we talked about Khadija, the Prophet ﷺ marries Khadija radiallahu anha. And the Khadija, how she sent the marriage proposal to the Prophet ﷺ. And even the Prophet ﷺ was interested in Khadija as well. It's two-way because they were both amazing. Khadija had some amazing qualities. So did the Prophet ﷺ. So he was also interested, and the nikah takes place when the family of the Prophet ﷺ, they went to the house of Khadija. And so we at this stage, this is where we left off. The nikah, the Prophet ﷺ, he marries Khadija. And the interesting thing, the father of Khadija, Khuwailid, some narrations say he was drunk. He was drunk at the time when this nikah was taking place. And he, so you can imagine, because obviously at the time people used to drink, right? And he was drunk. And where we will continue is what happens next. Like he becomes sober, and this is during the nikah of the Prophet ﷺ and Khadija radiallahu anha, and this is where we left off. So this is just like a brief summary of what we've talked about so far, and we'll continue, inshallah, next session. And now we have a bit of an idea, of just a quick refresher of what we've talked about so far in the life of the Prophet ﷺ, as he's now 25 years old, and he marries Khadija radiallahu anha. Okay, so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he give us an understanding and ability, and give us like a thirst, and really give us a love the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and really a thirst to want to learn about him as well. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he increase us all in rahmah and hikmah, and may he bless you all. Jazakumullah khairan for attending. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك